just to make it officially.
So welcome to our gathering, Coaching for All Seasons, Here to Serve. We're glad that you can join us today, and we look forward to this time together. My name is Sarah Tees. I am a Level 2 ELCA coach. I'm also a Stephen leader and a lay leader at my congregation in Fullerton, St. Paul Lutheran Church. And we just want to remind you that our Synod coaching team has cultivated this gathering for you as an informational resource, and it's meant to enrich you as church leaders, as council members, ministry teams, or committees, and we want to enable you to navigate missions for discipleship within your congregations. Throughout this last year, our mission has been to hold brave space for you as you discern your next faithful steps in whatever your missions may be. But before we begin, we would like to have you center yourself in prayer. So make yourselves comfortable. You can turn off your camera if you like. We just ask that you keep your microphone muted when you're not participating. And we ask you to take 3 slow, deep breaths and invite the Holy Spirit into this space as we pray together. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this digital space. We are grateful for all the ways technology enables us to keep in touch and to keep going. We ask you to open our minds and hearts to what you are telling us today. We ask you to teach us what we do not know, to lead us to paths of new understanding. Guide us, Lord, to know your will in our ministry, our community, and in our roles as church leaders. Thank you for these opportunities to grow in understanding, to learn and to discern our next faithful steps forward. Amen. So today, we are privileged to have John Roberto visiting with us. John brings to us some highlights from his webinar series, which presents us with hybrid models for developing a hybrid future for lifelong faith formation. Most recently, he collaborated with Dave Dalbert, an Illinois-based ELCA pastor and author, who developed these webinar series on hybrid church together. And one of the many lessons that the pandemic has taught us is that online church is not going away, but neither is a return to in-person worship happening. So it begs the question, how do we blend the two into an organic whole? It's the question facing everyone in the faith community, not just our denomination, and drawing upon his lifelong attention to faith formation, John is going to present us with ways of looking at common experiences like Bible study or confirmation in a hybrid way. He spent a lifetime working in faith formation, teaching, writing, researching, consulting, and developing program resources. He is the founder of Lifelong Faith Associates, and he is also the author of several publications. John, thank you so much for joining us today, and we welcome you to Coaching for All Seasons.
I'll sit here. Thank you. Pleasure to be with all. I am on the other coast. I'm in Connecticut, just so you could place me geographically. I'm like halfway between New York and Boston. So we are in the midst of autumn, and you are probably in the midst of your 2nd or 3rd season of summer, so on the West Coast. So I just by way of background, what I'm going to do today is there'll be the presentation. I've got a bunch of resources and I'll share with you at the end of the presentation my website so you can see where the resources are. They're all free. The PowerPoint is also online. You don't take feverish notes. You have all of that. There's some articles that support this as well. You can download those. If you want to use the chat to drop in any questions for the Q&A part, that would be fine. So don't lose a question, either put it in the chat or just jot it down. At the end, we'll do question and answer. Oftentimes for this presentation, it's more, how do you apply this? So we'll work on that. Okay, so let me share the screen and we'll be off and running. Okay, you should all see that, I hope, pretty well. Get just set up here. Okay. Just for your own reference, my website is lifelongfaith.com. So that's all you really got to remember. If you ever want to email me other resources, materials, and the rest, it's jroberto@lifelongfaith.com. So it's just real simple. Once you've got that down, you pretty much have got everything you need. Okay. This is the website. I'll preview this just to let you know that if you go to the Home tab and just click on it, underneath there, there's a tab for this webinar. You'll be able to download the materials right from there. Really easy to do. Okay. I want to start with kind of what we've learned over the last 18 months, besides the struggles and the difficulties of the pandemic. What are the things that we've actually learned that I think are transferable post-pandemic? And eventually we're going to be in a post-pandemic world. It's just going to take some time. But some of these learnings, they're just things that need to continue. So as I work with churches, I really have been emphasizing to them that the things that you've learned over the last 18 plus months since March of 2020 are transferable. So these are all things that you can continue to do. I'm working also on the assumption that we're never going to go back to the world of March, or well, I'll say fall of 2019. That the world of fall 2021 is a very different world. Our people are different. We've experienced things different. And as we look at all of life, it's pretty easy to see how the pandemic has simply disrupted every single aspect of life, social, economic, political, religious, et cetera. So what are we learning? I think one of the most important things we learned during the pandemic is that people began to refocus on people. So leaders started focusing on their people, their needs, struggles, life issues, and more, because the programming they were doing got all disrupted. And so the assumption we were making about the lives of people got dramatically changed because people's lives changed. And so we had to adjust. And you could tell the congregations that did the best were the ones that stayed most in touch with their people, relating with them, connecting with them, responding with them, picking up the phone and calling them, et cetera, et cetera. And what happened in that process is those churches became actually more person-centered rather than program or provider-centered in their approach. Second is we're expanding our vision of where church and faith formation happens. We've moved from really a church building mindset. I mean, everything happened on the grounds of the church at a fixed time in a fixed place, to this multi-space approach where faith forming happens at home, online spaces, small groups, mentoring relationships, independent learning in the world. So we just expanded our vision of church, and with it, we expanded our vision of faith forming. Faith formation happens now in so many different ways. We're using new approaches. Now, many of these approaches were around for a decade plus. So it's not like these approaches just kind of appeared on March 15th of 2020, but we started using them, tools, methods, media, especially the digital tools. And the pandemic motivated or forced us to use these as integral to faith formation. Okay, so, there was a percentage of churches that streamed worship prior to March 15th, 2020, but then all of a sudden on March 16th, everybody was streaming worship if you wanted to be able to worship. So new approaches, new methods, new tools, all of that have become more integral. And the churches that I think are moving ahead have integrated that into the way they do faith formation. Churches that want to get back to the way things used to be have abandoned those really at their own risk in terms of really leaving behind people. We're offering faith formation finally in synchronous and asynchronous times. So synchronous real time, and then asynchronous on your own time. And so we worked on the assumption that if it wasn't happening at a fixed time at church where we were kind of in control, learning or faith forming wasn't happening. In fact, the pandemic disrupted all of that. Moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas and family became the primary locus or focus of faith formation. We developed online and hybrid approaches. I'll get to what actually a hybrid approach is. And we expanded the opportunities for people to engage in faith forming experiences. They could go online and access that. They could do it in one-to-one. They could do it over Zoom or FaceTime. There were so many options that then opened up as we tried to engage people. But the key insight was we used new approaches, and we learned that we could do faith forming in synchronous as well as asynchronous ways. Faith formation became mobile. I mean, the iPhone's been around since 2007, but we really took advantage of the fact that we have the technologies and tools to bring faith formation to wherever people live, in their homes, in their daily life, in their cars, wherever it might be. And that more and more churches started creating what I call playlists, a lot of people call playlists of faith-forming content. I'll demonstrate a couple of those with you today. And then we're using traditional tools in new digital ways. I have a good friend who's a Catholic pastor in San Diego, and they had their old traditional church bulletin. You all know the weekly church bulletin. They repurposed the whole thing into a digital online newsletter. It was their primary faith formation. And it included the reflections on the Sunday readings, it included Bible study, all in the newsletter. And they also printed it and delivered it in person. They actually deliver more of their weekly newsletter online than they have parishioners in the parish. So their footprint became huge. And then we started using social media platforms for connection and sharing. I mean, most churches had a Facebook, site, those kind of things, but we started using it as integral to learning, as a way for people to connect, communicate, share what they're learning, discuss, share projects, especially in the faith formation, in videos and images and stories. This is what we're learning. This is what our family's doing. This is our Lenten celebration. Here's a ritual we did during Lent, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we learned all those things. And the churches that learned them and started incorporating them in the mindset and the way we do faith formation, I think are actually thriving and are in a platform for continued growth. So the big question is, how do we create church and faith formation that's adaptive, responsive, resilient, flexible, and inclusive? I mean, those are my big five. The churches that were the most rigid, the most, everything was nailed down to the floor of the church building, and the least adaptive or responsive really struggled during the pandemic because they were so used to people coming to them for everything that they just didn't know how to go out to people and meet their needs where they were. So really a hallmark moving forward, if the pandemic has taught us anything, is that life will be disrupted more. Change is accelerating. Anything that was happening before the pandemic has been accelerated because of the pandemic. And so our stance as leaders and as churches are, how can we be more adaptive and responsive, resilient and flexible, and more inclusive, not of just those who are actively engaged, but those who may have been engaged once and for whom religion is just not important to them anymore. I think, so I'll take the glasses half full as opposed to half empty. I think it's a great time to reinvent, reimagine, and innovate. I mean, I think we've actually learned a lot during the pandemic if we'll step back and just reflect on it. And I think it's a great time to say, you can motivate people for change and introduce change now. And for the next year, you can just blame it on the pandemic as forcing us to do that. I mean, anybody who's been a change agent, and trying to manage change initiatives, half the time is trying to find what the right connection will be to get people to understand why change is important. Well, the pandemic is a pretty good thing to blame. And so I would blame it for as long as you can get mileage out of it in terms of how you change, so it's an external precipitating factor that you're trying to be responsive for. So that's the responsive, resilient, adaptive piece. So our focus today is hybrid. So we kind of backed our way into being hybrid during the pandemic, even though hybridity has been around, since Paul wrote his letters in the first century. So what is hybrid? Now, people use the word hybrid, and it's going to suffer from what always happens in churches, is that we're going to overuse this word so much that it means nothing after a while. And so I want to try to recover what hybrid really means. And I'd all recommend, if you get a chance to read Angela Gurrell's book, Always On, it's kind of the best one volume to read about this new media landscape, but also what hybridity really means. Angela teaches theology and practical theology at Baylor in Texas. And she's got this great quote. So I'll just take this one quote out to kind of crystallize it. She says, recognizing online actions as meaning-filled helps Christian communities to consider our current online and in-person reality in terms of its hybridity. So her assumption is we're already hybrid people. If you have an iPhone in your pocket and you work online part of the day, you already live in a hybrid world of both the physicality and the online. So we think of current online and in-person reality in terms of hybridity, rather than in terms of digital dualism, thinking of online as virtual. That's why we don't use that word really anymore, and in-person is real. So when you say the online is virtual, you mean, well, it's kind of make-believe fantasy. And in fact, we've all learned it's hardly that. It's very real, and it's been the primary method and tool that we've used in order to connect with people and to do ministry and faith formation. She says, hybridity describes the coming together of online and offline media and matter, or more dynamically, the interplay between the online and offline dimension of life. Most Americans already live hybrid lives because our online and offline lives have been integrated. Interactions online shape offline experiences, offline communication, and practices shape online engagement. So hybridity is the coming together of these two worlds, if you want, the in-person world of physicality and the online digital world. And so when churches said, we're streaming Sunday worship and now we're hybrid, they weren't accurate. They were streaming worship digitally. It was online. But the hybrid piece, where was the physicality of that? Where was the in-person interactive piece of that? So when we say hybrid, we mean the interactive that happens in person, and we mean the engagement with online media. So it's coming together of those two. And I'm going to try to demonstrate that. Maybe we could talk more about that in the Q&A. So here's the way I try to set it up. Now I'm going to speak more about faith formation, in particular, lifelong faith formation, but this applies to really every aspect of church life. So simply suggest that there are three basic approaches to the way we think about church life. Gathered programming, we all know how to do gathered programming. It's the in-person physical setting. It's been somewhat limited by the fact that we do a lot of things at church, but it also includes mission trips and camps and all those kind of experiences. On March 15th, everybody had to go from red to blue. And so consequently, some did it well, and some didn't do it well, and some was the first time there, and it was like a disaster. But we had to do everything online. So we had to deliver content online. We had to do worship online. Everything moved in the online format to stay connected with people. Over time, we moved from online programming into hybrid programming, where there was an in-person piece combined with an online piece. I want to explore how those work together. So, and those could be synchronous, real time, or asynchronous. And so all of a sudden, our kind of the canvas we paint on in terms of thinking about faith formation is much bigger. When you only had to work on gathered programming at fixed times at church, the goal was, how do I get people here? And that's why it's such an interesting thing that the biggest question for Christian churches across the country is, how do I get people back on Sunday? It's simply the wrong question. It's simply the wrong question. Reframe the question. How do I stay engaged with people? And sometimes we'll stay engaged with people and they'll be in church settings. And sometimes we'll stay engaged with people and they'll be in home settings. Sometimes we'll stay engaged with them and it'll be in personal or work settings. And sometimes it'll be in hybrid settings where we combine the online and the in-person together. So we have to reframe these questions because people are not pouring back to churches anywhere in the United States that I'm aware of. And I think Canada probably is the same. And we're going to have to take advantage of the fact that we've now gotten at least somewhat good at three different ways of engaging with people in real time, as well as on their own time. So the hybrid nature of church and faith formation now is an opportunity for us to really seize, I think. So let me take an example. So it's really easy to do this when you're a brand new church. Okay, so this is the Slate Project in Baltimore, Maryland. So this was a church that was built bottom up. I think it's maybe 10 years old. You can go online, just Google the Slate Project. And the 5 elements or aspects of their church life are breaking bread, which is their weekly worship on Monday evening. And the demographic here is obviously not 70 or 80-year-olds. This is 20, 30, and 40 somethings, right? And there's a pastoral team that works. So Monday is in person. They utilize the Cathedral of the Incarnation in Baltimore. Then they have Bible study, which is they call Recovering the Bible is a Story Worth Telling, which is called their Wake Up, Word Up on Tuesdays, and that's real time. Then they engage images, and that is an online interactive piece. And they do what they do around that is they often use Twitter as their primary communication. So you see online worship. Slate Speaks, which is their interactive kind of worship, Bible study, all rolled into one. And that's done on Twitter. And then they have audio video content each week that they provide people. And so in the bottom right corner, you see their schedule: Monday with dinner church, Wednesday with Slate Reads, which is their book discussion, theological discussion, which they do all on Twitter with a hashtag. There's Slate Speak, which is, again, a live tweet chat, new topic every week. There's also bookmark. And so they kind of seamlessly blend things that we're doing in person, things that we're doing online, into one environment. So we look at the whole church. This is a great example of a hybrid church. They kind of seamlessly integrate all these environments into a whole. It's worth checking out. The video is really worth watching. So what does hybrid church and faith formation allow us to do? It allows us to expand our reach. I mean, that's the single most important thing about everything I'm talking about. New ways to engage people, new ways for people to learn, to be engaged with each other, to interact. We've just expanded our reach, and we've broadened the campus that we work with. Okay, so here's an example. So I thought the example would give me a chance to kind of play with this a little bit, and then I'll give you some processes and tools. So first one is the Gospel of Luke is from Yale Bible Study. So you can go online, you can access it, it's free. So I picked something that was free. It's an 8-week Bible study. Those are the 8 topics. So it's a Bible study designed for either individual use or small group use. It's free, it's at Yale Bible Study. But if you brought a hybrid mindset to it, what might you do? Well, you could use it as a gathered program. I could have a large group, we could watch the video, we could break out into small group discussions. I could have small groups at church, watch it using the same content. So like one content or program, multiple purposes. I could do it online. I could post it on my website, have independent learning around that. I could have small group learning with the Zoom component, add a little interactive piece to it. And I could do it hybrid. Do some sessions on your own, be in a small group for other sessions. So increasing what this mindset of these 3 different programming models, asynchronous and synchronous, allow us to do is take one resource that you got for free, and really they do, almost, well, all the Gospels, New Testament, and then most of the books of the Old Testament, is able to program it now in 3 different ways: gathered, online, and hybrid. And so you don't need money to do this, which is great for smaller churches. What you need is to think broadly about where people learn and grow and how they'll do that. You might be familiar with a wonderful free resource, the Bible Project. We're in Luke's cycle. That's where I picked Luke because we're entering Luke's cycle come this Advent. This is their series on Luke Acts. It's a 5-session episode. It's all video and animated. This is, if you have never watched the Bible Project video, treat yourself. They're just wonderfully done. And then the handout is there. So I can now do the same thing with this resource. We can have a 5-session program. We could do it at church. We could do it in small groups. We could do it online. We could do it at home. It opens up all these possibilities. Okay, so we've got the content and the resource to make this happen. So a couple of more, I'll do a couple of examples, then we'll have some discussion. So worship is the easiest thing to turn into a hybrid experience beyond streaming. Okay, streaming is not hybrid. Streaming is just online. So you take the weekly worship, whether it's in person or live streamed, and then you wrap faith forming experiences around that worship experience. Will come playlists, prayers, readings, video, podcast, art, music, et cetera, et cetera. And there's just gobs of free resources online for the lectionary readings. You could add a social dimension, really make it hybrid with after worship sharing in person, or a Facebook group for the Sunday readings, or a Zoom gathering. So the one example of worship, which you already do, you're already going to prepare for it. All I'm doing is fashioning faith formation around that and turning what can be a one-way into a multi-way. And it's both synchronous and asynchronous. This is just an example. You may be familiar with Milestones Ministry. This is their weekly Taking Faith Home. Well, it's designed, it's a playlist, essentially. It's just designed for people to be able to take this home with them. And so I want to use this in my model and add some interactive pieces to it, add some other elements to it. But it's the readings, it's blessings, it's a milestone, it's a devotion, there's a service idea, there's a ritual and tradition that goes with it. You can build it on a playlist. This was a simple playlist I did for a group of churches. This was from the Call of the Disciples back a couple of years ago. It's going to come up again, in 22. And it's just connection to online readings, to some video. This is from Saddleback Kids. The story path from Union Theological in Richmond has this wonderful website that connects children's storybooks to the Sunday readings. Simple things. I worked with one church that their worship was a sermon, was a thematic every month and sermon series based. September, the first month, I just did a sample for them was gratitude. And so it was something to learn, 2 videos, something to pray, a psalm a week, something to read, listen, or watch, and then a daily basic gratefulness practice, a prayer practice. Simple stuff. But it took the worship experience and it surrounded it with faith-forming experiences, synchronous and asynchronous, online, hybrid, as well as gathered. Another variation on this, there's all kinds of variations around this. This is in person with online video meetings. So lots of people kind of got into this kind of a model where you could meet in person now. And then because we don't want to meet every week and it's really hard, so you engage in online faith forming. You have a playlist that you do that with, and then maybe a video meeting in Zoom or a small group meeting or family groupings on the 4th week. So there's a rhythm and a pattern to it. There's something synchronous week 1, there's something synchronous week 4, in between there's asynchronous learning. This is just a variation on that with live streaming in week 3. So it's in person, 2 playlist sessions, and then a live stream. So it's staying connected and engaged with people, but it's making it easier to participate because 2-3 of the weeks go to you where you are, whether you're at home or wherever. So there's an in-person synchronous, and then there's a live stream synchronous, and then there's 2 asynchronous sessions. The flipped classroom model may be the most familiar with people because schools have been doing this. It's in the educational world, it would be called blended learning. And essentially what happened in the flipped classroom, if you're familiar with the Khan Academy, if you're not, you ought to check out what that great resource is for education. That what you used to do in the classroom in terms of teaching the content, you now flip. And so the content, because of great video and just great digital content, you can now learn that content online and or in small group. And then when you're in a physical space, the focus becomes kind of experiential immersion. Apply the content, create, practice, perform, participate with it. So individual or small group online, gathered program, physical space. This is a truly hybrid model because the whole program is done in a hybrid fashion with different pieces being done in physical space and in online space. And I'll give you an example. So here's a very easy example. This is a blog post from Keith Anderson's church in Pennsylvania. He did God on Tap. Now, this is pre-pandemic, okay? But you can start bringing something like this back. And so we're all familiar with blogs, and we're certainly all familiar with pub experiences, right? So this was his God on Tap. So we're all familiar with that. And what Keith did is he wrapped this experience in a flip model. What he did is read the newsletter, embedded in there as content, maybe a video to watch and the rest, so that tomorrow night or next week, whenever, we'll be able to have a beer, have very light, informal, and talk about the content in the blog. So we often think we'll do adult faith formation and we'll use this informal setting and we'll present a lot of content. Well, this is not the setting for presenting a lot of content. The content moved online in the blog with audio, video, and text, and the discussion and the enjoyment of each other and the application moved in person. So it's a hybrid model, online, in person, and both doing best what they do. And adolescent confirmation program is my other flipped example. Everybody struggles with adolescent confirmation because you're dealing with 2 things that are really hard to put together: adolescence and confirmation. And so participating regularly, so what would happen if you had made this a hybrid model? Some on your own, some in a small group, some in a large group. So on your own, small group online, large group in person. So this is the example. Yeah, this is the example. St. Edward the Confessor Church is actually on the West Coast. I worked with this church about 10 years ago. They're in Dana Point, California. Their church, actually, their backdrop of their church is the Pacific Ocean, just stunning. And they went from a traditional weekly confirmation program. Every 400 teenagers in 9th and 10th grade would show up weekly. You can imagine that the youth minister's primary job was crowd control. They went to a hybrid model because they were so frustrated with the in-person model. And what they developed is once a month in-person classes and 3 weeks of online study in small group. So the way the month goes is the online study is a place where students develop their faith weekly by completing multimedia experiences, lessons, videos, readings, et cetera, et cetera. Each small group has their own online space. Now, this was pre-Zoom when they created this. Now you just would use Zoom. An adult leader or maybe an adult and youth leader facilitate the group, chance to ask questions, pray for one another, process some of the things that they're doing, reading. And then they come together in a large group experience where they're taking whatever the theme of the month is that they processed and read and the rest, and they're experiencing it personally with each other. So every month, three online sessions, one of which is a small group, and then the monthly session. There's still youth group meetings, service projects are very much in person, retreat is very much in person. It's a blended model. And it's the best example that I have of really what hybrid looks like from the bottom up. It's a hybrid model because we're doing what? On your own, in small group, in large group, synchronous and asynchronous, all rolled into one. So this is just a great example of what's possible. I've got some other examples in here that you can look at. This one's a playlist-driven approach to hybrid. Online learning and small group gatherings. My colleague Kathy Pittenger at the United Methodist Church of Michigan, the conference in Michigan, this is a playlist she did on creation. This would be the learning for a whole month with children and even younger teens. And there could be an action project connected to it. So you talk about timely. So you kind of get a feel that you pull these elements together. You see in the model, there's some online, which is asynchronous, small group, which is synchronous. You could have large group instead of that. You could have in person. There's so many ways to put this together. So there's a couple more examples, but these are all also described in the article that I have with it. Let's see if I got it close. Okay, so let me wrap up with this, and then we could talk about process this. The key of what I've been trying to communicate to people is we now have the methods, the tools, the media, the content. So now where do you want to innovate? And so especially in this pandemic era, we've got to ask people, if you're going to do something new, you got to stop doing something. Whatever that something is that you got to stop doing something. And so we have to work with people and say, what do you want to stop doing? Is there something we can redesign in light of this hybrid approach? Is there something we tried during the pandemic years that we want to continue to sustain? And there's something we want to initiate, something new. And then for whom and with what approach? So stop, redesign, sustain, or initiate. And then when you take that approach, where do you want to start? And my theory of change is start with the lowest hanging fruit. All right, there's no use picking the fruit at the top of the tree if you can start at the bottom of the tree. So look where the opportunities are for reinvention of what you're currently doing or creating something you haven't done yet. And that's just some of the doors you could walk in. Sunday worship is truly low-hanging fruit. I mean, there's so much you can do to fashion faith formation around that. Church year seasons. The hard things of where it is to gather people in person is just a great candidate for a hybrid, so you can be more strategic about when you gather people. And number 9, I really am serious. Anything you do in adult faith formation should be hybrid. These adult lives are so complex and so busy, so with all this content that's available for free, there's no reason why a church shouldn't have robust adult faith formation. And then think about this over a 3-year process. So, we were forced into this immediately because of the pandemic, but year 1, like if I was working with people now, I'd be saying, this winter, spring of 22, what do you want to launch in fall of 22? That's a reinvention. And so how do I take something I'm already doing, like the list I just showed you, and reinvent it for 22, 23. And while I'm doing that, as I get ready for the 23, 24 year, I know it sounds like 100 years from now, right? But it's not, is what do I continue to reinvent? What do I create new? In other words, we have never done this. We've never had faith formation with young families. So we're going to try something new. I wouldn't try something new necessarily in the fall of 22, but I would in the fall of 23. And by the third year of my plan, I continue to sustain, expand, and reinvent what we're already doing as I continue to evaluate and create new projects. So if I can give people a 3-year mindset and say, pick the low-hanging fruit in your church, then I've got a chance of helping them to innovate. So that's kind of, and we could talk more about how that works, but it just seems to me coming out of the pandemic, people are tired, exhausted. But when people are finding that what they're doing leads to productive meetings and information, enriching people, and they all of a sudden you find energy that you didn't have before. And I think partially is how do we guide them to innovate smartly? Sometimes it's reinvention, sometimes it's creation. So that's the short version of the presentation. So there's a lot to put together, but I just think people have had the touch with hybrid. If we can give them some ways to think about how to innovate, give them a kind of all the starting points that they can innovate in their church, and then say, let's help craft a 3-year plan. All I'm telling churches to do this year is just get through this year and keep breathing. My focus is the fall of 22. So starting in January of 22, we want to start thinking about what will it look like in the fall of 22 and take the 6 months it takes. But this year it's going to be messy. So let it be messy, and try and make it a good messy, and keep your head above water. But people are not, like, by the fall of 22, we should be figuring some of these things out. And if people are experimenting with hybrid, whether they knew it or not when they started, this is a platform to build on. So I'll stop talking and see what kind of questions and things you want to get. And I'll show you the website before we break.
There you go. So thank you, John. I wanted to point everyone to the chat box. I've included John's email address for you, his website, and then the Pacifica Coaching Group website as well. If you have any questions for coaching or for the coaches at Pacifica Synod. And yeah, I noticed that Andreas had a question about the slate example that you showed us, John, and Andreas, did you want to ask that question again?
Yeah, actually, thank you. I had 2 questions, and the first was, so I began serving my congregation January 1st, 2020, and March 15th, like everybody else, we changed models, right? So I was still just getting to know folks. When we were closing, we had just started Lent, and we were having a Wednesday evening study on actually messy spirituality. Was the name of the book we were looking at, and it was a good conversation. We probably had about 25 people each Wednesday night, and that we really, we had to put all our efforts into Sunday, so Wednesdays just ended at that point. But I did a new Bible study for Advent, and I had one person show up 1 time, 2 times, and then not again. And I tried it again, I guess, during Lent, and my attendance dropped. And so we had a retreat recently with my council leadership, and I said, well, what kind of Bible study would you all like to do if this is apparently not what you like to do? What about it was wrong? Was it the wrong time? Was it the wrong program or so forth? And they said it was on Zoom, and they didn't want to be part of that. So what I just wonder what kind of a response you have for that. And that's just my first, and then I'll ask the second.
Yeah. So it's so funny. Zoom, when I hear that from church leaders, not your response, but question, but we're just really lucky we had Zoom.
Yeah.
Zoom, we've been mailing things to people, think about that for a second, right? So when people if they have Zoom fatigue, like they don't want to be online anymore, then this may be the opportunity, and it's really age specific. I find most of the time, get the generation that says, okay, I'm enough of this. So I always remind people how do you like, and I'm guessing the generation here, so if I'm wrong, correct me. Like, how do you stay in touch with your grandkids? Well, we're on FaceTime a couple times a week, and FaceTime is online. So your kids, you're living in Los Angeles, but your grandkids are in Connecticut, so you're not visiting, are you? So I think people are being selective, which is okay. And if people are tired of digital stuff, that's okay too. So maybe now that things are starting to open up, we say to people, we're going to offer an in-person option and an online option. Same program, in person or online. The second part might be, and this is just keeping your ear to the ground, people may not need the traditional content that we would have put into Bible study before March 1st of 2020. So how does the Bible help me make sense out of messy lives, even though you were doing messy spirituality? And Mike Yaconelli, oh God gracious, that was what a great book. I remember him well. Maybe it's about pain, maybe it's about hurt, maybe it's about change. What does the Bible have to say to these things? Well, it has a lot to say about all these things, right? And so some of our content has to shift, I think, in our faith formation efforts. Not that we're not going to do Sunday worship, but our content has to shift in faith formation because these life issues are really overriding almost everything else. And so, and I maybe didn't need to do something really short, we're doing 3 weeks, these little short little modular things, because people's time frame has changed. You say 8 weeks, people think that's a lifetime, 8 weeks. I mean, like that was a standard, right? For how many decades? 8 weeks, 8-week Bible study, right? Yeah. Now you say 3 weeks, I can do 3 weeks. Don't make it 4, you can do 3. I think time frames have changed. I think that personal issues and struggles that people have are really overriding everything. I mean, I think that's partially why people, like we always hear these reports, people are angry. I think they've lost control. I don't mean that personally, but I mean, as a society, all these other changes they have no control over those, and they do have control over whether I'm going to come to your Bible study or not. And I'm not coming, or whether I use Zoom, it's just funny behavior that a year from now we will actually maybe smile at, but right now it's like, oh my God, what's going on, right?
Yeah.
I think too, it's like a coping mechanism for people, that aggressive procrastination or aggressive putting off of things to reclaim the time that they're losing because they're so darn busy. And, and so, yeah, like you're saying, it's very selective. Yeah.
I would look at content. I would look at other methods. I mean, I would suggest it in person, you can socially distance or whatever.
Yeah.
And just see if some of those pop up, or, you guys meet, in somebody's home, and I'll come on via the screen, and we'll talk. So that, it's kind of a version of live streaming, but it's more interactive because it'll be on Zoom or whatever platform you use. So I would just play with those. This is still a year to play with different ways and seeing what really gets traction. People are not going to be too happy if we're still playing with things in the fall of 22, but right now they're okay, and you say, well, you don't want to come to what I'm doing, so I'm going to play with something else, without blaming anybody. I mean, life was happening, it's just the way it is.
My goal was to say, what, if I'm not meeting your need, what would meet the need? I'm open to doing something different.
And if you could turn that into, well, it's a chance to experiment. Now we got to suck up all of our energy to say, it's not about me, whether they like me or not, or it's a chance to experiment with something new and see what happens. I still think we've got this little window. What does Susan Beaumont call it? Liminality, a period of liminality between what used to be March 1st of 2020 and what's still emerging in, let's say, fall of 22, that we can try some new stuff. I would try some new stuff.
Yeah.
And if it fails,
I can ask my second question as well, Sarah, if that's
sure.
Okay. And that was basic. I mean, looking at the presentation that you showed from Slate Church, it looks great. I'm a single solo, same thing. Solo part-time pastor. Putting together, during COVID, I redid our website. I think it's a lot better. I'm not sure how many people actually look at it. I'm trying to put more things content-wise even on there so that people will go there and maybe find some other things as well. I don't know. Between that and putting out an online with MailChimp newsletter, hopefully every week, so that people get information. I did get feedback that they said that was really helpful to stay in touch and connected. But I have to say it was more informational than it was devotional. I didn't find I had the time to really do a lot of reflecting and so forth. So it was really about here's different things that are happening and so forth. But folks, I think have found that helpful. But anyway, I'm still pretty much doing it on my own, and seeing that production by Slate, I think a lot of churches like that get started with a team, and that's a great model. It's not particularly an ELCA model, though maybe it should be. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I believe there were 3 people who started it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if they're still all there. I don't know all the history and the last, but I know there's 3 people. There's a kind of what I call an origins video on there where they tell about how they operate and how community based they are. So that's interesting. Like when you start from scratch, you're able to write your own script.
Mm-hmm.
When your church is like 100 years old, you don't get a chance to write that script. You get a chance to add another chapter to it. I think the key thing is, I have X amount of time and I have a skill set, and maybe I can get a couple of people to contribute their gifts and talents to do certain things. And then what I always say is just do those things really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Like, I don't want to set anybody's expectation that, well, and thank God Facebook has had a darker day, because, you'll find me on Facebook 24 hours a day. Not a chance. Okay. Or I'm going to send you, 144 characters or 2, whatever the new number is on Twitter, no, that's not going to happen. All right. So you just simply say, I'm not in doing that. So, but the newsletter every week is done with lots of care. I don't have to even create the content, because one of the things that's really been clear in the pandemic is we curate content as opposed to creating it.
Mm-hmm.
So who's got a great devotion? Who's got a great devotional series? Is Luther Seminary doing an Advent devotional? Are they doing a Lenten devotional that I can simply connect to? But the newsletter is your way of engaging people. And if that's getting traction, use that, move with that.
Yeah.
If the Bible study didn't get traction, let it go for now. So sometimes what we have to gauge is, what are the things that are going to get some traction that I really want to experiment with? What are things I'm going to leave behind? And I can't do all of these things, but I can pick the ones I think are best for our community.
Yeah.
And that have what I'll call high leverage. I mean, they're things that if I put time into this is worth doing, and this is going to get. So like I always say, being Roman Catholic, sacraments are, people just spend time with it. Well, if you don't do those really well, then what are you doing well?
Mm-hmm.
Like you're a sacramental church, you even got 7 of the darn things, like you should do them really well. And if you're not doing marriage prep well and baptism prep well, who's going to be around for First Communion? So my low-hanging fruit is, these are areas that you can really make a difference in. You can't do all 7 of them at once, but you start working on the ones and getting some traction.
Mm-hmm.
That's just being strategic. So take that, for yourself personally, take that 3-year, that example I gave for the 3 years, and work that example out for a project or a couple of projects, so that you got something new going on, and then you have something you're sustaining going on. And just, that's your lane, and make it a really great lane. I think people's expectations have been recalibrated in many ways. And so if they were expecting a whole lot of provider-centered stuff before the pandemic, I think that's changed during the pandemic. But if you're getting traction in certain areas, go with it. And as you work with the churches or you're coaching the rest, that's certainly, my advice to people is, it's not the quantity of what you do, it's the things that you do have leverage and are high quality, and then you're engaging people, and do more of that, and then pick a new project, and then pick a new project, and then pick a new project over time. That's why I always say, people said, where would you start doing start with worship? You're doing that. You may not be providing any other thing, but start with worship. And how do I make it really hybrid, not just streaming? How do I make it hybrid? If I'm back in person and I have streaming and in person, how do I still create a little ecosystem around worship to really make that really sing? That's my low hanging fruit.
Yeah.
Yeah. No need, like, you don't need today to go out and do brand new stuff when we can curate really high quality content. I mean, amazing. Like, if you've seen the Bible Project videos, I mean, they're amazing. This Yale Bible study, these are all the divinity profs at Yale. I mean, it's amazing. People write the textbooks that everybody reads from. Like, it's just amazing content, free.
Mm.
So I'm not going to spend 6 weeks creating a Luke course when I could just plug into the one that your divinity profs with books on the subject have written. Like, why would I want to spend that time?
Yeah.
I want to offer anyone else a chance to ask questions.
I think Shirley's cat has a question for us.
Yeah, actively participating. Anybody put anything in the chat that is a question?
Well, I really like what JP was saying about JP, why don't you go ahead and expand on your comments? But I love what you're saying about grief element and also about the resistance to change.
Well, we all know that the church is the notorious place for change. And I had resistance people putting up the TV. I had resistance before the pandemic, giving online. Of course, now that's a saving grace. But the grief, I think going back to the grief, we have Wednesdays midweek fellowship. What really caught people's attention was not so much the Bible study prayer, but when I opened up and say, how are you all doing with the grief? Like, you're not able to see, well, your grandchildren are somewhere, but you're not able to see them. It's not the same on the Zoom, not able to touch. That's what connected people with each other. And then to pray for them. So we need to, pastors also need to change. I can't have my own agenda, say, I have a Bible study here. Hello. No. Throw that and then see what people need more than what we have for them to what we have to offer them versus what their needs are.
Yeah. It's just, I mean, we all believe this and practice this. It's just person-centered ministry. What are the needs of people, their life struggles, their issues, their joys, their hopes, that we want to make that central to what we do. And the pandemic has just really, focused us on that to say, look, you got to be people-centered. Don't worry about all the programs, curriculum, textbooks, and, Sunday school, like focus on this and see what emerges out of this. Because you have a much bigger toolkit to address people's concerns and issues than you did before the pandemic. Just the amount of resources that have been created, just the tools we have. So that toolkit's bigger, even though I know the struggle is real, and people's lives have just been totally disrupted. I just always smile and say, well, we're gonna get back to where we used to do things. And I say, I'm gonna add you to my prayer list, because you're gonna get really frustrated trying to get back to the way you used to do things, because we're not turning the clock back to September 2019. It's not gonna happen.
I love all the animals involved in today's Zoom call. Best dog just interrupted her comment typing. This is cracking me up. But
well, that was a pandemic phenomenon. I mean, you could hardly get a dog to adopt anymore. There were no dogs left. I mean, so there was the dogs really benefited during the pandemic. I don't know about cats, but I know dogs certainly did. So
I wanted to give anybody else a chance. Did you have any comments or any questions for John? He is a pandemic puppy.
Yeah.
I think for some of us a challenge. I love the concept of liminality. That speaks to me. But I think what's happening maybe for some people in Andrea's congregation or others is that it feels more like purgatory. Mm. There's not a sense of something emerging yet. It's just still painful.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so as we try to communicate, I think we have to open our minds to that possibility that people aren't ready yet sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is, so you're on your way to the Red Sea with Moses, and you're not there yet. And the people are not so sure they're going to get there. And so the key is to keep people focused on some kind of vision. It doesn't have to be big, but it has to be clear. This is what we're like. This is what this church stands for, and this is what we're doing and to communicate that over and over and over again so people can get through liminality. So I mean, a leader, one of Ronald Heifetz's like first understandings of leader when he was doing the adaptive leadership thing, he said the leader has to get up on the balcony, has to survey what's going on, and when he comes back down, he's got to say, this is what's happening, but this is what's going to animate and drive us. This is our vision. And it doesn't have to be brilliant. It doesn't have to be any of those things. It just has to be things that speak to people's lives. And so, first thing is to acknowledge the pain and then to say, but there's a way through this. And to keep doing what we do in a very hopeful way, So I think if you haven't read Susan Beaumont's book, Liminality is in the title, but I'm not going to remember the whole title. It's her newest book. She's a great consultant. She's with Congregational Consulting, formerly Alban Institute. But her book is really well done. And this liminality piece is really helpful to see how you go through these kind of stages until we emerge into a new synthesis or new paradigm. But central to that is being honest with people and sharing a vision with them, and also doing things that embody that vision, which is why it's okay not to be getting everything right now. It's to keep on showing people life goes on, ministry's moving on, we're trying some new things. And, by the fall of 22, we're going to have some really interesting things up and running. So just, we're going to walk together. And also remember, even when Moses got on the other side of the Red Sea and they were all freed, it took him 23 minutes to start grumbling that there was no food. So even when you have a vision and people have a new direction, they're still going to grumble that there's no food. You've liberated us, but it was really better back with the Egyptians because we at least had one meal a day. So the joys of change. I don't. It's just there's nothing you can do about it. Just the way things work.
What was that? Excuse me. The reference to Heifetz?
Oh, Ronald Heifetz. Heifetz. He really wrote, the first book he wrote was called Leadership Without Easy Answers. Isn't that a great title, right? This has got to be, oh my goodness, I bet it's 25 years ago already. And he's written books on that, but he was really the pioneer of adaptive leadership. I mean, he was the first to really use that word and then kind of lay that out. And he's got the most interesting background. He is both an MD and a PhD. So he brought that kind of diagnostic mindset to leadership. He was at Harvard, maybe he still is at Harvard. I don't know if he's retired or not, but he took one of those courses at Harvard that people sign up 5 years in advance to take, because it's on adaptive leadership. But yeah, just Google him, and there's some articles online from Harvard Business Review that give you a good synthesis of what he said. But the whole concept of adaptive leadership is just central to what we're doing right now. And if you came across, well, if you read Todd Bolzinger's book, Canoeing the Mountains, that is based on Heifetz's approach to adaptive leadership. And Bolzinger puts it into our context and then has the great analogy of, Lewis and Clark taking their canoes across, waiting for the river to take them to the West Coast, and getting out in the middle of the country and finding, oh my God, there's mountains ahead of us. These canoes are going to be useless. So any parallels to our current situation in church is purely coincidental.
Well, we are out of time for our meeting today, but I do want to offer you all I do want to point you all in the direction of John's website, and be sure to reach out and email John if you have further questions or if you
Please.
need more assistance with your specific situations that you're dealing with. I also want to remind you all, church leaders, to take care of yourself. And it's with that in mind that we want to introduce our gathering for next month, which will be led by our coach, Daryl. Daryl, do you want to go ahead and speak to that?
Sure. Yeah. One of the things, like Sarah just said, one of the themes that we always try to cover throughout the year is self-care. And December, of course, always on our mind is Advent and Christmas. And so that time we're going to have a special time of just some rest, renewal, and maybe reset, as we have some silence and some guided meditation and some time of prayer. And hopefully we'll be able to break out into maybe some small groups for each of you to speak with one another and support one another. And it'll be a wonderful time for us just to kind of, again, rest in God's presence and let Spirit speak to us that morning as we gather.
Mm-hmm. So we invite you all, please join us for that event, and hopefully we'll be able to highlight more of what we have planned for next year as well, because we plan to continue these gatherings each month and offer these resources. So with that, I'd like to close us with a benediction. Our friend and coach Carol always shares benedictions from Stephen Charleston, and he is an Episcopal bishop. He's a retired Episcopal bishop. He's also a Choctaw elder. And this is one of my favorite ones that Carol has shared with us before. And I think it's very appropriate. Neither the watchful eye nor the healing hand will be far from you. Your path will find its own way, and your mission will be fulfilled. The angels will go before you, and the ancestors will walk at your side. What you have planted will prosper, and what you need most will be supplied. The work of your heart will bless all you love, and the wisdom you have shared will fall to fertile minds. You will be hopeful in difficult times and joyous in every good moment that can be shared. You will give what you have, just as you have received what has been given. Contentment will be a reward for you, as peace of mind has been your inheritance. Your prayers are being answered and will always be answered in ways marvelous and mysterious. Draw in a deep breath, a breath you have earned, here on the shores of faithfulness, beside the endless sea of compassion. Thank you all for participating today, and we hope that this information was helpful to you. John, yes, I can share that. John, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your invaluable resources and the concept. And I hope everyone was inspired and motivated, and at the very least has a new direction to take things. Please reach out to Pacifica Coaching Team if you need any assistance, or John and John's resources as well. And thank you everyone for coming.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.